In Mexico, survivors pulled from rubble following a killer earthquake. And rising tensions in Catalonia after police raided government offices to put a halt to next month's independence referendum.
Good evening. Beijing's top representative in Macau has reportedly taken over his Hong Kong counterpart's post. This comes as Jiang Xiaoming is said to be promoted to the top post of the State Council's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. Reports say Wang Zhenmin has already taken over from Jiang Xiaoming as head of Beijing's liaison office in Hong Kong. Prior to that, the 60-year-old Wang had headed the Macau liaison office since July last. Jiang is said to have been recalled to Beijing to take over from retiring Wang Guangya as the director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. 67-year-old Wang Guangya did not respond to reports about his retirement.
Overseas and frantic rescue efforts continue in Mexico following a 7.1 magnitude earthquake that killed at least 237 people. At a school in southern Mexico City, rescuers are trying to reach a 12-year-old girl who's buried beneath the rubble. Alan Booknia reports.
The girl, who wiggled her fingers for rescuers to see, was on the second floor of the three-story school when a wing of the building collapsed. That means she's covered by two huge concrete roof and floor slabs. Despite the urgency, rescuers have to move slowly, making scaffolding to prevent rubble from crumbling further. Occasionally, they'll demand total silence to better hear calls for help. Rescuers also say they've received text messages from a teacher and two students trapped inside. Earlier, they were able to pull some students out of the rubble, but it's believed 25 people were killed in the collapse, 21 of them children. In all, more than 50 survivors have been pulled from buildings around the country. Tuesday's massive earthquake leveled more than 50 buildings in Mexico City alone. Residents of the city of 20 million people expressed fear of being left vulnerable should aftershocks hit. It's the strongest earthquake to hit Mexico since one in 1985 that killed thousands. Initial reports suggest the collapses were limited to buildings that predate the 1985 quake, after which much stricter building codes were enacted. Much of the city is built on an ancient lake bed that shakes like jelly during tremors, making buildings more vulnerable. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto visited the town of Jojutla, which was at the epicenter of the quake and was left devastated. He said power has been restored to 95% of the 5 million affected users. But he said the priority now, apart from rescue efforts, is providing those affected with shelter and the distribution of food and water. Alan Booknia, TVB News.
Deadly Hurricane Maria carved a path of destruction through Puerto Rico, where it triggered massive flooding and left the entire island in the dark. And as Sonia Artero reports, Maria's wrath just won't quit. It regained strength and is now hitting the Dominican Republic.
Maria reached Category 4, the second highest intensity in hurricane winds, when it slammed into Puerto Rico. The U.S. territory's 3.4 million citizens suffered a direct hit with punishing 250 kilometers per hour winds. Homes are in ruins and catastrophic flash flooding is wreaking havoc. Governor Ricardo Rossello imposed a dusk-to-dawn curfew to allow rescue crews to respond to the aftermath. Fighting back tears, the mayor of San Juan just praised they work fast to save lives.
I'm just concerned that we may not get to everybody in time, and that is a great weight on my shoulders.
Images of downtown San Juan show large trees toppled and lamp poles knocked down. The only local fatality reported was a man struck by a piece of lumber hurled by high winds. Residents all prayed as they hunkered down in the safety of a school-turned shelter. Maria took its first swipe at the Caribbean, where it killed 9 people. The remote island of Dominica suffered the worst of Maria's wrath. Aerial video shows countless homes obliterated. St. Croix, the largest of the U.S. Virgin Islands, was battered as well. In St. Thomas, widespread flooding, just as residents were picking up the pieces from Hurricane Irma's direct hit. Maria is now expected to scrape across the northern coast of the Dominican Republic as a Category 3 hurricane. Residents there rushed to batten down the hatches. By Friday, it's on track to reach the southeastern Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos, where many residents ran to catch a flight out.
Came here to the gas station, fill up my tanks. After here, I'm going to the food store, stock up on some food, and I'll be good from there.
By this weekend, Maria is expected to turn north and blow parallel to the U.S. East Coast. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
Back here at home, 2 former student leaders have been spared jail time for their role in the siege of a University of Hong Kong council meeting in January last year. Billy Feng and Coleman Lee were today ordered to perform community service despite the court warning earlier they could be imprisoned. Winna Wong was at the courthouse.
Sporting the tie of his alma mater, former University of Hong Kong Students' Union President Billy Feng walked out of West Kowloon Magistracy this afternoon, having been spared a jail sentence. Instead, Magistrate Ko Wai-hung, an HKU alumnus himself, sentenced him to 240 hours of community service on 3 charges of disorderly conduct in a public space, criminal damage, and attempted forcible entry. The student union's vice president at the time, Coleman Lee, also sporting the HKU tie, received community service of 200 hours for 1 summons of obstructing a public officer in the performance of his duty. Feng's lawyer, senior counsel Martin Lee, who spent the morning in mitigation, said that a court-appointed probation officer had recommended between 160 and 240 hours community service for them both. He made it clear that the 2 former student leaders had shown remorse and were ready to accept their punishment. The defense also noted that Feng realized his impulsive behavior had brought harm to the university, the exact opposite of what he had set out to do. 4 bundles containing more than 200 letters were submitted to the court, including those from the university's vice-chancellor, Peter Matheson, and council member Abraham Sheck, asking the magistrate to show mercy. Even the victim of Lee's offense, council member Leonie Key, had asked the court for leniency, saying she had accepted his apology and forgiven him. The magistrate said it had considered that both defendants had the support of their families, showed sincere remorse, and so had a low chance of re-offending. Supporters of Lee and Feng clapped and cheered when the magistrate announced that he would only be giving them community service. He added that even if the reason behind their actions was to achieve justice, once they break the law, that's what people will ultimately focus on.
I sincerely express my gratitude to the lawyer and my family members, friends, and all supporters to me and Coleman Lee. And that's all of my sharing. We are going to make no comment before the completion of the legal procedure.
The duo landed in court for their role in a protest outside an HKU building where its council were meeting to review the university's management structure. The protesters were demanding to speak with council chairman Arthur Lee and had surrounded the exit of the building, blocking the council members from leaving. Leonie Key had felt unwell during the chaos and needed medical help, but it took paramedics more than an hour to get her to hospital after her stretcher was blocked by Coleman Lee. Winna Wong, TVB News.
The chief executive has spoken out in defence of Hong Kong's judicial independence during an official visit to the British capital. Carrie Lam slammed comments by some British politicians as disturbing and disrespectful. The CE made the remarks while addressing a group of top officials, including Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, and business leaders at a Trade Development Council dinner in London. She criticised UK officials who had condemned the jailing of 3 former Hong Kong student leaders last month.
It is therefore extremely disturbing for me to know that some politicians and commentators here in the United Kingdom are querying the independence of our judges over recent judgments without any sound basis. Those comments are totally unfair to our judicial system, which has gained worldwide recognition, and disrespectful of our judges, including illustrious UK judges who sit on our Court of Final Appeal.
Lam went on to highlight some of the incidents she's had to deal with early on in her tenure as CE.
4 members of the Legislative Council have been disqualified by the court, while another 2 have their appeals rejected. Several student activists have been imprisoned following a sentence review by the Court of Appeal. Banners and posters advocating independence of Hong Kong have appeared in our university campuses. All these require immediate actions and unequivocal response which fall on the shoulders of the Chief Executive. There is simply no room for wait and see or delegation.
Lam also joked that she had to adjust to becoming Hong Kong's first female leader.
There is a legitimate expectation that I should dress well and put on local designs to showcase Hong Kong's fashion brand. But you know, these culture pieces are not always affordable by a government official like me.
The CE also assured the high-powered dinner that the best was yet to come and listed out Hong Kong's advantages under one country, 2 systems.
As long as we get our act together, adopt a clear vision, and embrace the many opportunities in front of us, Hong Kong will scale new heights.
The CE and Hammond had earlier witnessed the signing of an agreement to boost fintech cooperation, which encourages firms in Hong Kong and the UK to share facilities and explore new business opportunities. Lam also met with British Minister of State at the Department of Education, Nick Gibb, and briefed him on the SAR government's $3.6 billion package of measures to support the education sector.
The United States is weighing whether the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal serves its security interests. All parties to the agreement have held a meeting at the United Nations where U.S. President Donald Trump called the deal an embarrassment. After calling the Iran nuclear agreement the worst deal ever negotiated by the United States, Trump declared he has decided how he wants to approach the deal. But not even his top national security advisors know what that decision is. America's top diplomat repeated Trump's long-standing position that the deal does not address Iran's troubling non-nuclear behavior and that the most serious flaw of the deal must be addressed.
And that is the sunset clause, where one can almost set the countdown clock to when Iran can resume its nuclear weapons programs, its nuclear activities. And that's something that the president simply finds unacceptable.
Tillerson was speaking after a meeting of the parties to the accord that he called very open and candid. He added that Trump does not wish to leave the Iran nuclear deal to the next president. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said he does not expect Washington to abandon the deal and said doing so would undermine the credibility of the U.S. He added that it would be a big mistake for U.S. officials to think they can pressure Iran by abandoning the deal. The European Union's foreign policy chief stressed the deal is not simply a bilateral agreement between 2 nations.
And as such, all member states of the United Nations are considered to be bound to the implementation of it. So it doesn't belong to 1 country, to 6 countries, to 7 countries, to the European Union. It belongs to the international community.
Mogherini added there is full agreement that the deal is working and the international community cannot afford to dismantle it. Trump must decide by October 15th whether to certify that Iran is complying with the pact, a decision that could sink the deal and worsen Middle East tensions. If he does not, the U.S. Congress has 60 days to decide whether to reimpose sanctions waived under the accord.
The U.S. Federal Reserve hinted that there could be 1 more interest rate hike before the end of the year. Fed Chair Janet Yellen also announced that it would start shrinking its massive $4.5 billion portfolio of bonds. They were amassed after the 2008 financial crisis, while the Fed tried to sustain a frail economy. She said that would begin in October, with reductions of $10 billion a month, gradually rising to $50 billion over the next year.
Spain's prime minister has called on Catalan regional leaders to cancel an independence referendum set for October 1st. In a televised speech, Mariano Rajoy said the leaders have no legitimacy to carry out the vote. Hours earlier, Spanish police raided Catalan government offices and arrested officials to halt the vote. The regional president said the action meant Madrid had effectively taken over his administration. Tens of thousands of protesters have been demonstrating against the measures. The court suspended the vote after Spain's central government challenged its legality. The government says the referendum goes against the Constitution, which states Spain is indivisible. Still ahead on tonight's news. A government plan to enhance the safety of the city's drinking water. The student union of the Chinese university removes a banner advocating Hong Kong independence. And Chris Patton defends his own remarks over the jailing of 3 student activists. Welcome back to TVB News. The government today launched a monitoring program to enhance the quality of the city's drinking water. It includes taking over 600 samples of water annually from public and private housing for heavy metal tests. Rachel Lung reports.
In 2015, samples of drinking water taken at a number of public housing estates were found to contain excessive levels of lead and nickel. Now the government has come up with a new plan to monitor water quality. Starting in December, the Water Supplies Department will randomly take samples from the taps of public and private housing estates, unlike running water samples that were used before. Authorities will collect about 670 drinking water samples in what they called random daytime sampling. Half of the samples will be taken from households in the new territories. Water will be tested for the existence of these 6 metals, and results will be announced on a regular basis. Any samples that exceed safety standards will be subject to a second round of testing. That's when taps will be flushed for 5 minutes, then stagnated for 30 minutes. Then 1 liter of stagnation sample will be collected to verify the findings.
As advised by the IEP, this sampling protocol has been used by European and UK for a long time. And what their experience is use the population basis to estimate the sampling weight. And this is the best method. So far, they have practice and experience.
A regulatory body will be set up to implement the stringent control measures on contractors, plumbing materials, designs, and construction.
We believe that we go 1 tier up so that we set up a regulatory unit in the Development Bureau. And what is more is that they will be advised by a water safety advisory group comprising leading scholars and outside experts. So we do think that that's the best way forward.
The voluntary program will run for 3 to 5 years, and the data will be used as a basis for the government to determine whether a more stringent standard than the one by the WHO is needed. The government is urging households to participate and is also looking into setting up an independent regulator to monitor quality. Rachel Ling, TVB News.
The student union of the Chinese University of Hong Kong has removed a banner advocating Hong Kong independence from a square it manages. The student body explained on social media that the banner was put up there by anonymous people more than 2 weeks ago, without going through application and approval procedures. The group said if kept in place, the banner would deprive other students of the opportunity to use the space. The student union stressed it had not bowed to pressure from the university and vowed to keep fighting for freedom of expression.
The last British governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patton, was on the defensive today. He said he questioned the decision of the Secretary for Justice, not the local courts, on a decision to appeal against the sentences of 3 young activists. He spoke to Elmi Leung earlier.
Chris Patten wanted to set the record straight that he has never criticised the local judicial system. But he did question Secretary for Justice Rimsky-Yun's decision to review the sentences of activists Joshua Wong, Nathan Law and Alex Chow.
There is justification for appealing on sentences, because that's the allowed to the government and to the Secretary of Justice. The question is whether in this context it was a sensible thing to do, given the abduction of people on Hong Kong's streets, given the increasing evidence of interference in Hong Kong's affairs by the Central Government Liaison Office. I had very little doubt as to how people would react.
Former Director of Public Prosecutions Grenville Cross, who backed the decision to appeal against the trio, recently said Patten knows better than anyone that it's up to the judiciary, not the government, to decide whether or not to allow a review. The former governor hit back.
What he's implying, and it's fairly disgraceful because it has no factual basis, what he's implying is that I criticised the judges and the court. Never done that and never would. I don't want to get involved in an argument with him. I'd never heard of him before I read these remarks.
On Hong Kong's political deadlock, Patten urged the government to be more proactive in engaging dialogues with different sectors of the community.
My bottom line is that I love Hong Kong and want Hong Kong to do as well in the future as it's done in the past.
Elmi Long, TVB News.
All right.